Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to Hildegund and Kim for inviting me here. This is my third summer in Salzburg as part of the Summer Academy, and the energy that you conjure here in the summer, with these wonderful, enriching meetings of minds, fuels me far past the summer and into the year. And I also want to thank my students for being here on a Sunday morning, and I look forward to picking up some of the conversations we've had here in the Global Academy in our Fortress classroom this week. So Shuda opened his beautiful keynote yesterday with ideas of the planetary rather than the global, and used a picture of the title sign of a beautiful exhibition curated by Dr. Devika Singh at the Dhaka Art Summit called Planetary Planning, which we commissioned and realized in 2018. The image you see here is an installation shot that includes one of our hundreds of school groups taking a tour of an exhibition. This exhibition happens to be that Planetary Planning exhibition. And here they encountered works of art inspired by transnational experiences of artists such as Zarina Hashmi, pictured here in the large vitrine, but also Bangladeshi artists and architects such as Novera Ahmed, Mohammed Kibriya, and Muzrul Islam, with works that had not been publicly exhibited in decades, taken on loan from the Bangladesh National Museum and the estate of these artists and architects, who had transformative artistic experiences in Pakistan, Thailand, Japan, and the United States, even before Bangladesh became a country in 1971, after a period of de facto colonization by Pakistan from 1947 to 1971, winning a bloody war for independence, fueled by the country's desire to speak its own language. What is the Dhaka Art Summit? I mean, I can't talk about that in 15 minutes, but it's an alternative, non-commercial research and exhibition platform, free to the public and primarily funded by a young collector couple, Nadia and Rajib Samdani. I will speak more about this in the coming slides, but when Shuda talked about planetary as something that considers the past, present, and the future, this image to me conjures our aspirations to be planetary in the sense that the summits are not biennial types of events. They're not isolated. They build off each other and they respond to each other. And it's a privilege to have been working on this nearly since the beginning for the past 5 years and to have committed to at least another 4 years of building and transforming this platform into the future. These girls and the thousands of other students, many of whom are protesting in the streets with those powerful images that Shuda shown yesterday, have been coming to the Dhaka Art Summit since 2012 as part of our school program. And visiting Dhaka Art Summit and processing it is actually part of their school curriculum. And these are some of the visitors who are most important to us. Culture is an important part of keeping anywhere secular. And these are the people who would transform Bangladesh and take it forward, hopefully to be a more humanist place where freedom of speech is safe and celebrated. Student protests are behind the founding of the country. The language movement began in 1952 with student protests where they were protesting the right to speak their own language, Bengali. Back to the question, rewriting art history, who does it? Not me. My job and calling is to take the M in me, turn it around, flip it inside out, and transform it into an uppercase we. But back quickly to me, and thinking about the planetary and radical solidarity, I want to read you a poem by the indigenous Chamorro poet from Guam, Craig Santos Perez. Remember, migration flows through our blood like the aerial roots of the banyan tree. Remember, our ancestors taught us how to carry culture in the canoes of our bodies. Remember, our people, scattered like stars, form new constellations when we gather. Remember, home is not simply a house, village, or island. Home is an archipelago of belonging. When writing or rewriting art history, I'm interested in looking at constellations within this archipelago of belonging that might not yet be visible given the way that colonial power structures work, where having access to Western platforms and forms of communicating can be an insurmountable barrier to professionals in the region who can't get visas or speak the language necessary to be heard at conferences such as these, or at the Tate Research Centers of the world. We are trying to build opportunities, jobs, fellowships, travel grants, to facilitate opportunities for people to read and write their own art histories within the region. I can't talk too much about this, but the next summit is taking a far more art historical turn in collaboration with universities, but not just within the global institutional elite, also within the region. But back quickly to me. Marina spoke about speaking from the place where we come from. So if we talk about decolonial or post-colonial, I actually am from a colonial context. I was born in LA, but my mother is Chamorro from Guam and still lives there. Guam, if you look at this map, is a teeny tiny island. It's close to Japan and the Philippines. It's nowhere near the United States. However, it has been under intense threats by North Korea in recent times, and it's one of the most militarized places in the world. I was currently there during the North Korea summit. There was military presence from India, Australia, really insane. But what's interesting is the population of Guam, which is 130,000 people, is 1/3 the size of the visitor numbers of the last Dhaka Art Summit, which was about 318,000 visitors in 9 days. About 65 of these 65,000 of the 130,000 people are of indigenous Chamorro descent, like my family. My great-grandmother was a subject of Spain, Japan, and the US all within her lifetime. My people joined the military, US military, at higher rates than any United State, yet they cannot vote for president, who is the commander-in-chief of the United States military. Our lands are occupied by military bases, which we were not fairly compensated for. Our people were tortured in Japanese prison camps during World War II, but we received no reparations. Our visual culture and history is scattered in museums all over the world, and we do not have access to it. So my interest in decolonial methods comes from this very personal place, and my experience in Bangladesh fuels my imagination for what I might do in Guam one day, and I am very grateful to Clementine for her beautiful presentation yesterday. But back to Bangladesh. So here what's interesting is you're seeing an end date, 2012 to 2020. When we started the Dhaka Art Summit, it was really an experiment, and what I found is actually it's become this kind of big centralizing force, which I also think is dangerous. And when Shuda was talking about these seismological shifts, I think there's been so much energy that's gone into building the summit, but what happens when our mountain goes down and another one pops up elsewhere? So what's the Dhaka Art Summit to me? It's a place where we can look back to think forward, a place where we can ground contemporary practice in Bangladesh and South Asia into the rich existing history of transnational exchange. We're not really building anything new here. These connections existed in the past, and actually I would argue that they were more vibrant in the 80s than they are now. Natasha already spoke about Nilima Sheikh, but behind this beautiful painting, there are two wooden sculptures by a Pakistani artist named Shahid Sajjad. Shahid Sajjad lived in the Bangladesh hill tracts with indigenous communities there from 1965 to 1967. And he learned wood carving techniques from the people there, which would inspire the rest of his practice. This series, called Hostages, referred to the plight of these communities who had been dislocated and put under conditions of fear, not only in the 1950s or the 1960s when Sajjad was living there, but also today. What's difficult in Bangladesh right now is that people from Pakistan cannot get visas to Bangladesh. Luckily, through the summit, we're able to catalyze some differences, some exceptions, but as a general rule, they cannot. The Bangladesh government doesn't really want to talk about this connectivity with Pakistan, but when it comes to artistic practice, this is a very important thing to look at in terms of writing or rewriting art histories. The period of Bangladesh when it was in East Pakistan basically isn't written anywhere, and it's very urgent for people in that context to address this. These works actually exhibited in Bangladesh in the 1990s in the same institution that hosts our exhibition, the Bangladesh Shilpakala Academy. And we decided to exhibit these because, one, we wanted to show the existing connectivity between Bangladesh and Pakistan, but also there's intense military conflicts at the moment between the indigenous communities and the armies in these areas. Nothing can ship from Pakistan to Bangladesh, really nothing. We have no art insurance, 120% tax on foreign art, and other very high logistical things to surmount. But it's these constellation of friendships that made this and everything possible. The next slide you see on the upper right is a woman looking at a 13-panel mural by a Bangladeshi student collective from the 1970s. It existed in the 60s as well, which was called Om Shampratik Amra, roughly translated to We Are the Contemporary. I found several panels of these murals lying in terribly bad condition at the Chittagong University Museum, and I was very curious to learn more. We worked at the museum, and we found out where the missing panels were, and we did research and found out that this is actually the first work of Bangladeshi art to exhibit abroad. It exhibited in 1972, so Bangladesh became independent in late 1971, in a festival of Bangladeshi culture in Calcutta. There were no passports at the time, because the country only became independent in 1971. So the founder of the country had to personally obtain road permits for these students to go to India. And these murals actually tell the story of Bangladesh from its Buddhist times, its Hindu times, up to famine, independence, death, and a new future. The last summit also took a turn. So the summit was supposed to be a place of South Asia exchange, but actually, when you think of the way people are scattered all over the world, regions are really geopolitical constructs. People don't really define themselves in that manner. And so if you look at the image on the bottom right, we tried to bring together people who could consider the past, present, and future of inter-Asia exchange that is not catalyzed by Western colonial intermediaries. My next slide is, what is Dhaka Art Summit to the outside world? I am flabbergasted and shocked every time I read international press that starts talking about Dr. Maria Belshaw being one of the curators of the Dhaka Art Summit, or listing, the small numbers of international artists with kind of branded market names that participate. Yes, they do take part, but that is not what this is about. And I find another way I need to shift this model is that if people are looking for these names as a point of recognition or a point of validation, it's actually not fair to the important work being done by the colleagues in the region that don't have branded institutional power. People get impressed that we can create museum conditions in a country with no art infrastructure, at least a formal art infrastructure. But this heavy lifting is not what Dhaka Art Summit is about. In terms of rewriting art histories, in 1971, just months before Bangladesh gained its independence, the Pakistani army shot and killed most of the Bangladeshi intellectuals to try to kill the brain of the culture. This was called Operation Searchlight. So the government was cognizant that supporting culture was important to building the country. And in 1974, it set up an entity that was called the Bangladesh Shilpakala Academy, which is a national academy for fine arts, which is also a collecting institution. They're our partner, and they host the Dhaka Art Summit. And interestingly enough, and a great way to see holes in people's biennial research, is that the oldest biennial that still exists in Asia is in Bangladesh. It was started in 1981, and it's called the Asian Art Biennial. And it was started by, so it was a government initiative, but it was started primarily by this dapper-looking man wearing sunglasses and bell-bottoms inside, who exhibited in Fukuoka in 1980 at the Fukuoka Asian Art Show, which brought together artists from around Asia to try to catalyze this interregional dialogue. And it was he was one of the advisors for this show, and when he was coming to advise on how the exhibition would come together, he came up with the idea that Bangladesh should be hosting an Asian Art Biennial. And most countries declined to be part of it because Bangladesh was such a new country, no infrastructure, yada, yada, yada. But when drinking whiskey with fellow artists, which include important artists from Indonesia and Malaysia, like Mojtar Apin or Reza Piadasa or Ray Albano from the Philippines, they created this inter-artist solidarity. And while the governments declined to be a part of this exhibition, the artists organized their own participation. And some of those works are actually of extreme important art historical value. And I bring this up in terms of catalyzing exchange or networks because for 2 years I lived in the Philippines and I was commuting between Bangladesh and the Philippines. And I wrote a piece about the history of this biennial and I sent it to Patrick Flores, and he was really interested because he does research on Ray Albano. He wanted to read the catalog essay again. So I have all of these catalogs, so I opened it and I read it, and the last line says that these works are presented as a gift to the Bangladeshi people. And so we started going through the collection, and actually there are quite a few works, a lot of them missing, but we found some of them, of Filipino modern art that are in Bangladesh's national collection. And when visiting Patrick's exhibition on Albano, he had these photos of Albano in Fukuoka, but he didn't know who this large dapper figure was, who was Syed Jahangir, the man I mentioned before. So in a way, there aren't funding channels that are bringing people from the Philippines to Bangladesh and Bangladesh to the Philippines, but that's kind of our responsibility now, is to find a way to open up these channels and to give these people the ability to talk and think together. So the next summit will be having master's and PhD students from Africa, Southeast Asia, and South Asia coming together, not only in Dhaka, but elsewhere in the region, to try to revive these connections that existed before and stop having this, or to try to fight against this East-Western binary. Thank you very much.